You're listening to a Comics XF podcast.
X-Men. Get it!
Hey everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Battle of the Atom. This is your weekly X-Men podcast where we rank every story from A to Z.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Zach, the bad boy of X-Men podcast.
Are you doing like a Max Headroom thing? What is going on right now?
Yeah, I didn't mean to, but then I accidentally stuttered because sometimes I like legitimately stutter. We're going to get back to how I got to Max Headroom. But Adam, I don't think I've ever told you this. When I was in 10th grade, someone at the lunch table asked me, so Zach, what was it like growing up with a stutter? And I was like, that's weird. I grew up with a stutter. I did not know this about myself.
Oh,
Turns out I did. And no one told me.
Oh, that's awful.
I mean, like the school said, hey, he's fine, but let's throw him into some speech therapy for a little bit. But apparently I had a stutter. I did not know this.
Huh. See, I was always under the impression that you, like, because you've talked about going to speech therapy before. I always thought that was like something.
Have I?
Yeah, you've mentioned it on the show before.
I mentioned a lot of things on the show, Adam. I do not recall.
No, but I don't ever recall this intervention story of like some friend of yours saying that off the cuff.
You say intervention. It was me having lunch and Maggie Toll just saying, hey, Zach, what was that like? And I was like, I don't know, Maggie. I didn't know I had that. That's weird.
Thank you for telling me, question mark. Oh,
I went home and I asked my mom, I said, Mom, did I have a stutter? She's like, oh yeah, a little bit, Zach. We got that fixed.
Oh.
And I said, oh.
Did you?
Okay.
did
nice to know.
Mom? Okay.
Anyway, but because I did that, then I remembered that this is a Mojo episode. So I was like, Max Headroom, perfect. Let's go. That's
yes. Yes. So last week was Zach's pick, and we had a really good time with those IVX fart cloud stories. So this week was my pick, and I decided, okay, we're going to do 3 Mojo stories. And then I picked 3 Mojo stories. What?
So Adam, right now, I'm gonna break the kayfabe here.
Yeah.
We were talking, you and I and our mutual friend, Anna Papard, friend of the show.
Uh-huh.
Right before this, and I asked, Anna, are there any good Mojo stories? Because she thought our picks were atrocious.
Yes, she has told me they were bad, and we're gonna talk about them.
Adam, we should have done. Oh, Adam, we messed up.
There's so many we could have. So many. It's true.
We should have done the Uncanny Adventures annual.
Oh yeah. That would have been fun. Listen,
so that one's got a Himbo Havoc in it.
We agreed before we got on the air that 3 solid ones are Wild Ways, which we've never covered, but we've also already covered Mojo Mayhem, and we've already covered the Long Shot mini. You have posited the idea that maybe there are no good Mojo stories, and they're few and far between. It's true, but some writers get what to do with this character more than others, wouldn't you say?
I think there are some writers who get what to do with Mojo more than others. I think that's fair to say. I also think that Mojo is a trick. Mojo is a trap for a lot of people. Sure. It's a character that's like, oh, we should do a Mojo story. And here's the answer. Nah, you really shouldn't do a Mojo story. You should do something else with your limited time here on Earth than a Mojo story. And then they do a Mojo story.
I love how you just YOLO'd every X-Men writer. You were like, you don't have time for this in your short, pitiful existence. Get to something else.
Hold on. I will say, there has been about one writer who used their time to do a Mojo story, their limited time, very appropriately. And that was Grace Frond, who did a Mojo story on X-Men Unlimited Infinity comic about Mojo Jr. II.
Oh, I haven't read that. That sounds fun.
Hey, Adam, it's great. I don't want to spoil it, but it's one of the best things that they put on that Marvel Unlimited. The X-Men Unlimited. You should, Adam, that's our next pick. Our next pick should be an X-Men Unlimited catch-up.
Oh, that'd be fun. Yeah, because there's a bunch of stuff that I've been meaning to, I read it sporadically, so I miss big arcs. I feel like
But
I need to read that Sunfire Red Roots thing, because that's kind of tying into the books now. And I don't know. There's just stuff I should read.
I do think it's funny. Spoilers, TM for X-Men Red that just came out this week. I do think it's funny that Sunfire's, Apocalypse was doing a classical elements magic spell, and Sunfire was not fire. I think that's very funny. And then I do think that Apocalypse's demon guy said, "You're kind of stretching this big guy." That was a really great doing one magical spell.
That was a really great scene, because it really did seem apparent that Al probably wanted to use Richter, and has Apocalypse say that, and is like, "Hey, you got to work with what you got." It was a great.
I don't know if Al wanted Apocalypse to use Richter, or that using Richter would have made thematic sense with everything else that's going on, with what has gone on with the Apocalypse story. However, Richter has been de-emphasized in the Krakoan era since the end of Knights of X.
It's true. It's true.
And it's we can't reintroduce him. We got to use the stuff that we already have. We're already pulling too much.
Yeah, it's just one of those moments where you kind of see the writer's voice coming through the character.
Which would never happen in a Mojo story.
No. So even though this is an Adam pick show, we do have to thank our very gracious patrons who help run this show. So
that's the thing, Adam. That's the thing about our supporters over on patreon.com/Battle of the Atom. They reach deep down into their hearts, their pocketbooks, and toss a couple of coins into our coffers, largely so that our audience can be in control of the show, and you're not at the whims of me and Adam playing pranks on each other.
Apparently.
And then also ourselves. Because here's the beauty of it. Adam's like, "Oh, we should do a Mojo episode. That sounds fun." And then he had to find Mojo stories.
Well, we do have 3 Mojo stories for you this week, folks. And, I'm not going to apologize. Last week, we had a lot of fun talking about those Terrigen Mist stories. So I don't see any reason why we can't have any fun this week. However, this first one, it really did really made me grit my teeth a little bit, because this is Uncanny X-Men 460 to 461 Mojo Rising by Chris Claremont and not Alan Davis, who is drawing the book as part of this era. Unfortunately, this is a 2-issue fill-in by Tom Rainey, and Tom doesn't quite have the chops that Mr. Davis does.
I think Tom Rainey's fine, but this is sandwiched between Alan Davis and Chris Bachalo. So you're just gonna look bad by comparison, no matter what you do. But Rainey is he's doing his best Davis in this.
He's trying. It's just that because this is a Mojo story, we do have a lot of sort of almost like Excalibur-esque hijinks going on, especially in the second issue, that I feel like Alan Davis...
I would say that those Excalibur-esque hijinks are actually a feature of what Claremont was doing in this run on Uncanny.
It
at
feels
least
like
up until this arc.
Yeah, it feels like something that would work really, really well with Alan Davis's style. But when Tom is doing it, it just doesn't have the same, it doesn't land as well. He's just not as listen, I like a lot of Tom Rainey's art. I think he's very talented, but it just doesn't land the same when it's not that collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what is this story, Adam?
Yeah, so this arc takes place in between the X-Men's return from the Savage Land after Rachel was turned into a dinosaur. So
great
that's
story. You can hear that on a old episode that I did with Miles Stokes from Jay and Miles.
Yeah. And then what comes after this is, wow, it's End of Grays. So this is a very weird sort of transition point for, between these stories. And the first issue mainly centers around the fact that Psylocke has come back from the dead and needs to get reintroduced to the X campus, which is currently being occupied mainly by the Astonishing team. Then the second issue is mainly about Mojo stopping by. There's some Exiles nonsense, and I guess that's about it. I mean, like, it's just basically some tomfoolery that's happening.
There is some tomfoolery. I'll say the first issue does a lot of things, and a lot of it, what it does is Chris Claremont saying, "Hey, this is what's happening in every other X-Men book right now."
It's very much that, it also has the unfortunate scene of, gosh, this really does gross me out.
I know it does.
There's a checkup scene where Beast is examining Psylocke in the medical bay, and she asks, "How did you know it was me, that it was really me?" And he basically says he used his senses, and so he, oh God, this is gross.
I want to hear you describe this, Adam. Please
right,
tell our listeners what the Beast does.
He sniffs her, he
Yes.
rubs his paw on her, and then he licks her neck.
Yes, as you do. Have you not had a dog?
It's definitely flirtatious. He finishes this checkup by literally slapping Psylocke's butt as she gets up off the table. She kisses him on his dog mouth, and it's gross. Because these characters have no chemistry whatsoever before this issue, and this scene is terrible.
This is something Chris Claremont would do. If Chris Claremont did this in Excalibur and Alan Davis drew it, we'd be like, "Oh, Chris, you scamp." I still think Chris is a scamp in this. This is very Chris Claremont, you scamp. Because you have that, and then you have a scene where Rachel comes back from the Savage Land after convincing herself she was a dinosaur. Walks into her room to find Colossus is alive and making out with her girlfriend / roommate, Rachel, or Kitty. And Claremont is obviously like, "No, you don't understand. They were roommates. Joss, they were roommates."
Right. It is very clear. And I think that is an enjoyable scene in contrast to the other one that Rachel not so happy to see Colossus and is definitely jealous. So that definitely works for me.
Rachel is in this weird spot where she's like, "Everyone keeps coming back to life except for my mom. It's not fair." And one, Rachel, your mom famously did come back to life already. Two, right. In between these stories, she comes back to life again and all the X-Men kill her again. And three, you also came back from the dead like 5 years ago. So maybe pot and kettles are something we need to talk about, Miss Gray.
It seems a little heavy-handed, especially because then... one other little aside about the first issue is that because Claremont feels the need to comment on everything that's happening with X-Men right now, he's also inserting Enemy of the State into this, which is really funny.
He's inserting Phoenix Endsong into this. It's wild.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. So by the time...
this is also part of the weird time where he is writing X-23, and he gives X-23 the Fang costume.
Yes.
And do you know the backstory of the Fang costume? Like in general? Not the comic reason of why Wolverine wore it because he killed a dude. But
it's originally a design that Cockrum came up with for one of his DC characters, isn't it?
Well, I don't know about that. I think maybe, but he wanted to put Wolverine in it, and kind of as his sign off on the book, his hand off to Burn, he changed Wolverine's costume to the Fang costume, and Burn tried to draw it for like a second, and we can see this in the that Iron Fist story that you and me ranked a couple of years ago. He's wearing the Fang costume. Yeah, Burn draws that one time, and he's like, nope, this sucks to draw. I don't want to do it anymore. We're going back to the other one. Which I don't want to be like sympathetic to John Byrne, but I understand. Like, I'm not drawing all these little bones every time. I got 20 some pages to get through a month.
It's certainly not.
They keep trying to make the Fang costume happen, and I don't get it.
Well, now Dakin's wearing it, right? So
I guess he's gonna stop wearing.
All right,
he's gonna stop wearing it soon.
To keep it on Mojo, the second issue does have Mojo and Spiral showing up in the Danger Room and turning most of our X characters into X babies. There's also a crossover with some of the characters from Exiles who are running around as lawyers. And Mojo is very upset that Psylocke's cybernetic spy eyes have been removed, replaced, whatever it may be. And he's just kind of like causing chaos here until the X-Men figure out how to get rid of him.
Yeah, Mojo's just like messing around. He has a gene bomb, which is funny, except for Claremont already used that joke.
Yeah. And what's really wild is that the emotional arc of the second issue actually belongs to Juggernaut. And like, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't this a commentary on Chuck Austin's X-Men?
Yes, because if you remember, Adam, okay. Sorry. You remember at the end of Chuck Austin's X-Men, one, Sammy the Squid Boy gets murder killed by Black Tom Cassidy.
Yes.
Juggernaut's longtime boyfriend.
Yeah.
And then Zorn, who we have to be clear is Shen Zorn, Zorn's identical twin brother, not the Zorn that disguised himself as Magneto, disguising himself as himself.
Right.
The other one, the Beer Fest Zorn, as I like to refer to him as. He opened up the black hole in his head because Zorn had a star in his head, and this Zorn has a black hole in his head because it's an opposite of a star. Anyway, and everyone went into the black hole, including Zorn. And apparently black holes lead to the Mojo verse.
Sure.
That's where Juggernaut's been.
I mean, look, all of this is fine. It's just, it's a wild ride. Claremont is trying to pack in so much into just these two issues about so many different books. And, as well as Claremont juggles things, it can't hope to like tie all together because there's just too much going on, and the tones are switching back and forth depending on which, scene you're in. He wants there to be this high drama, but then there's X babies and, it's like, well, what are we going for? Are we going for the media satire that usually comes with a Mojo story, or
which doesn't really happen here?
Yeah. So it's a mess.
Hey, I've got a question, Adam.
Sure.
Look at the cover to the second issue to 460.
Yes. Done by
does it Frank Chow?
Go ahead.
Frank the Tank.
Yes.
The less said about him, the better, I guess. I don't want to outrage anybody. But I guess here's my question. Hold on. Oh no, I'm looking at the wrong one. Hold on 1 second. Pause. Vamp. Yeah. Okay. Here's my question, Adam. This comes not too long. Like, what does that cover remind you of? Does it remind you of anything? Because it reminds me of something pretty clearly.
Oh, where he's peeking around the corner?
Yeah. Do you know what it reminds me of?
What's that?
It reminds me of an Ultimate Comics cover.
Oh, interesting.
It almost makes me think, because look at that Mojo. That Mojo is off model. He has a beer bottle sticking out of his head. This is not normal Mojo.
Huh.
It almost makes me think that they were going to use this for a Ultimate Mojo, and then they switched things on Ultimate Mojo, and they had this cover around, and that's why they went with it.
That is interesting because it
I
does
don't-
have the bars that you would see on
It has
an
the
Ultimate
bars.
comic.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point, Zach. Good call.
I'm trying
Huh.
to see when the Ultimate Spider-Man arc with Mojo comes. Oh, wait, actually, when is this out? Okay, no, the Ultimate Spider one's a year later, but the X-Men one was right before that. So maybe it was something they had going, or maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't really know, but it's weird.
Look, it's an interesting note. And probably I don't want to call this uninteresting. Claremont is definitely trying to juggle all of these things. I just think ultimately it's unsuccessful. So I don't know if this is going to do so well on our big old list. Why don't you tell our listeners what that is if they've never tuned in before?
Folks, if you've never tuned in before, I'm going to be honest. Like, we do try and make this show approachable, but again, out of our Attitude Era, we are just doing this for us now. And if you want to listen along, that's fine. But we are not as concerned about approachability on this, and that happens when you rank 837 distinct X-Men comics over the last too many years.
So many.
Ranking them from best to worst, with the best being House of X Powers of 10, 100th being the Asgard Shi'ar War from Mighty Thor, the 200th being Two Birthdays and Three Funerals from X-23, the 300th being The Gentleman's Name is Magneto from Uncanny X-Men 104, the 400th being Generation X Holiday Special, the 500th being Going Through the Motions, a thing that I'm doing as I read this list, from Uncanny X-Men 303. Cyclops Retribution from MCP's at 600. Number 700 is that Gladiators Karma arc from New Mutants. Number 800 is Eve of Destruction, a bad comic. And that worst X-Men comic of all times, you know it, you love it. It's X-Men 2099 World of Tomorrow. It's just a regular, no X-Men. It's just regular 2099 World of Tomorrow. But it's bad. Hey, Adam.
Yeah.
Do we have much? Where is that Rachel Dinosaur story?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
That's at 552. That's at 552. This is worse.
Oh, I
than
think
that.
this is worse than that. That has at least that Alan Davis art to kind of save it. At least it looks nice. I'm looking.
It looks nice. It's dumb, but it's a different kind of dumb than a lot of bad stories.
It's silly, and it's certainly not trying to do as much as this. It's a little more straightforward. I'm looking in the 700s here. I think we're probably kind of low.
You think this is worse than like Iceman Volume 2 Icons? I think 700's a little low, buddy.
All right, so
this is
600?
This is not worse than X-Men Die by the Sword at 669.
All right, okay, I can be convinced.
This is a straightforward, if continuity snarled comic. It is not whatever X-Men Die by the Sword is.
Better or worse than Trial of Juggernaut by our aforementioned friend Chuck Austin?
It's better than Trial of Juggernaut, I think.
All right, okay.
Probably not as good as Days of Future Present at 649.
Yeah, I think that is correct. I also think that Wolverine 102 and 103 at 651 are better than this. Is this better or worse than Exile's Unnatural Instincts?
Well, that would require me to remember any distinct Exile story, which I don't.
That's tough. That's really tough.
Here's what I'd say. At right above that is at 656 Magneto War, which I think is better than this. But at 657 is X-Men 1/2 Thrall, and I think this is better than that.
All right, so this is going to be our new 657 Uncanny X-Men Mojo Rising. All right, that didn't do nearly as poorly as I thought it would.
Now, following up on that, Adam, you know how last week we were talking about some of the bad comics that were going around in like 2017, 2018?
Sure
2016,
did. Yeah.
2017, 2018, some of the rough times?
Oh, I remember those, yeah.
Adam, do you remember Marvel Legacy?
I sure do, yeah. I don't know if I necessarily remember more than the like cover treatments though. Like, what was the actual editorial push on that? Like, what was that supposed to do? Just bring back legacy numbering?
This was the last push of Axel Alonso's time on as editor-in-chief. It was his last big initiative that he led up. And it was almost entirely across the line back to basics. It was
right.
coming out of
Okay.
Secret Empire. It was, we are going to bring everybody back to what everyone loves about these Marvel comics. So they brought back legacy numbering. Nearly all of the comics like had something to do with a classic villain or something. So for the X-Men, what we got, Adam, is a story I know we all think about. Well, let's talk about the good. Let's talk about the good of Mojo Worldwide.
Mojo Worldwide.
This is the first crossover of the Resurrection line.
Right.
Which, the other thing that they brought back corner boxes, which was another big selling point of the Resurrection line. And I'm going to be honest, that's a bad selling point. Like, I like corner boxes, but that's not marketable, is it?
I don't know. I mean, I like a good corner box, but like, is that really helping if the story inside the comic is crap? And folks, what we have here is I'm not joking, a 6-part X-Men Gold, X-Men Blue crossover written by, we've got Mark Guggenheim on the gold.
Marky Mark.
We've got Cullen Bunn on the blue. And
hey! I just want to say, because this got brought up with unrelated to the podcast, but this got brought up with one of my friends this weekend. Cullen Bunn doing his best. Always just man put his all into it, and I respect that because no one else was at the time.
I want to get into this because I think we talked about this last week about, we talked about 2 Bunn stories last week. I see, at least on my reread of this, a distinct quality difference between these 2 books. Do you not?
Oh, I see a distinct quality difference. I also see a distinct amount of disdain in one of these books for what has to be written. And maybe I'm reading into it, but it kind of feels like I'm not.
No, I see it too.
It's a Mojo
right there
story,
on the page.
so it invites you to draw these inferences because it is by definition a meta commentary story. Let's start. Here's the best part of these, honestly. The best part, Adam.
Okay.
Those Art Adams covers on that that double cover for the first part of this. So good.
Well, keep in mind that is technically, there's 3 of the 6 issues have Art Adams covers. They are all part
right, because he was the cover artist for Blue.
Right, and they are all one piece. So
the gold and blue are one piece, but the
there is a 4th cover.
13s.
Right. Yeah, we're
13s, and then the blue 14 and 15 are different.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but the 3 connecting covers are all part of one piece. And yeah, man, those are great covers. I wish that the insides really had as much fun as those covers are having. They're not.
One thing that people don't remember about Gold and Blue is that these were coming out bi-weekly. So this is a 6-part series, but it came out over like just 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Like it was bam, 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 bam.
It doesn't help. The story still feels incredibly bloated and takes way too long because there is nothing of substance here. What Mojo does here is he launches a host of, I guess, obelisks down into New York City, where our X-Men have crossed over and are, for the second time in X-Men Gold, playing baseball. So there's your Marvel legacy right there, I guess. And
hey, remember, Adam, do you remember right around this time? And I think we talked about this the last time we talked about X-Men Gold. Do you remember how much they were pushing the X-Men play baseball again?
Lot of baseball.
Because it happens. It happened at the end of Extraordinary. It happens the first issue of Gold. It happens by the 12th issue of Gold. And in the end of All New X-Men, they were like, oh, well, let's not do baseball. Let's do a dance party. Freaking weird, man. They didn't play baseball that much. It was like once every 5 years to open a
Right.
scene, and it was fun.
Yep. Yep. So here it feels very regressive. It feels very stupid. And especially because
There is I'm gonna give Googs one kudos here.
which is
He has Old Man Logan and Jimmy Hudson sitting watching the baseball game, and they just kind of like acknowledge each other's existence and think, I don't want to freaking deal with whatever this is.
okay, but that setup is a great example of the kind of things that are switching back and forth as dynamics in between these two books that feel like the other writer doesn't like and or appreciate, but feels a little bit like grumpy about having to keep doing, right? Like there's a couple of these things like Kurt and Rachel and Jimmy and Logan that like you kind of get the sense that maybe Cullen Bunn just ain't on board for. And yet kind of has an editorial mandate to like make sure these things still are appearing in the scripts.
I don't want to put words into Cullen Bunn's mouth.
No,
but you can go back to our
guessing.
interview with Cullen Bunn. And this was late 2018, maybe early 2018. Cullen Bunn has some mixed feelings about his ending of time on X-Men and specifically what he had to do to make X-Men Blue exist and keep a job.
Right.
And that comes through here.
Oh, sure.
Because it feels like what Mojo does is he makes the X-Men play their greatest hits. Very literally does a Days of Future Past, an Inferno, just the greatest hits of the X-Men.
Yep. Yeah, they're fighting in these simulated spaces. It's appearing that some of them are dying, even though they're not. And throughout, the idea
is it wild that Bloodstorm gets impaled by one of Ahab's spears twice in a 1 year period? Because I forgot that happens in this comic too.
I did have to reread it because I was like, wait, doesn't this happen in Exterminated? And then I was like, oh, right, this is fake. Okay. Yep. Now I remember.
It's wild that it was the exact same way. But here's the thing. Guggenheim is playing this completely straight. Just like, yeah, don't you guys want to have a clip show of all of these better X-Men stories?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the answer is no.
No, thank you.
I do not. It's also interesting when Bunn opens up his first issue and has Mojo speaking to the audience and essentially says the X-Men fans feel like they're actually oppressed. Yes. It's like they pretend to be oppressed, like these are real people and this is a real thing. And it's one of the funniest things I've ever read in a comic. Because
that is one of the best examples of how Cullen is actually injecting a little bit of like acidic wit into his script, whereas Goog's script is like, my God, it's bad. Like just these,
it's just
very
nothing.
Bland one word like things that are being spewed out by the characters that add nothing to the story. And so you've got these backdrops of these old arcs, and I mean, my gosh, I guess there are supposed to be some things about character growth here. You know, he's still pushing this idea. Well, there are things that he's pushing, like Rachel being disturbed about being in Days of Future Past, right? But that doesn't go anywhere. Cullen is pushing the whole idea that like the other team is going to be mad that the X-Men Blue is working with Magneto. That also still feels a little disingenuous, but I don't know.
I think that part's wild to me, and that's the most like feels like editorial, and I don't want to assign anything to anyone specifically, but it feels like, no, Magneto's a bad guy, right? Like that's the legacy. And you have Kitty Pryde by the end of this, like, oh, you guys are working with Magneto? He's Magneto. He's super evil. And I was just want to be like, Catherine, like 2 years ago, you were hanging out with him. like as friends living in the same base.
Well, and the story contradicts itself because, like, Colossus is like, hey, remember when you were stranded in space and that guy brought you back? Like, so the script itself is acknowledging that that little animosity doesn't make a lot of sense. And of course,
It's
all of
so
this,
wild that they're trying to play Magneto as a villain in this, because it does not work.
yeah, yeah. No, and because the vast majority of the storyline are these simulated sequences, it has no bite. Um, we finally get to this point where I guess Mojo is in the real world and things have stakes, but it doesn't happen until like the last issue, really. And then it all just
Yeah.
wraps up, and the big stinger at the end is supposed to be that what Mojo is like, what, trapped on Earth, or
Yeah, and he set up Earth thing, so now there's Mojo worldwide, wide.
yeah, and it's like, okay. I mean, that might be interesting if like anybody cared, but it's not
Cullen
really
Bunn
gonna.
cleans it up in his last issue of X-Men Blue. Is what he
Yeah,
does.
right. But like, this isn't gonna have a lot of staying power because it's so ephemeral. Like I'm reading these issues and it just feels like a non-story in a way that they could not have written something that felt like it had less stakes. Like
It
there's so
really
much potential
feels
here
like
for
nothing.
interesting stuff. They try and reintroduce Longshot as someone who's interested in, maybe he's more of like a social media kind of guy, but at the same time it's meaningless. It doesn't do anything.
He's like a streamer, but then he only talks in movie quotes, which is annoying. That's the most annoying thing.
Right. That's what Bumblebee does in the Michael Bay Transformers movies. Like, we can do better than that. Um,
Yeah.
it just
It's
doesn't
how do you,
add anything
you think
to the story of what Mojo and Mojoverse is all about.
I think one other thing that really hurts this is a lot of artistic inconsistency. Because you have Jorge Molina on the X-Men Blue issues, on all three. And I think
Uh-huh.
Molina does a fairly solid job. I actually don't like his Mojo, but that's more of a stylistic thing than anything else.
Sure.
But on Gold, you have Mike Mayhew, of all people,
It's not
Mark
working.
Lamming, and Diego Bernard.
Yeah. It's bad.
It's so inconsistent. And I get that, you know what, maybe because Gold was supposed to, I think, have 3 artists trading off arcs, and maybe with the Adrian Seoff stuff, it really screwed up everything. Because it was supposed to be like Lashley and RB Silva and Seoff
Yep.
and doing like 3-issue things. But end of the day, that didn't happen. So I don't know. Maybe that screwed up everything, and that's why Gold takes forever to get any level of consistency, even if it's consistently bad.
Yeah, I mean, especially that first issue it just looks so glossy and sheen. It has this
Well, that's
sheen
Mike
over it.
Mayhew's style.
Yeah,
They
but it doesn't fit what it is that it's trying to tell. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely not. It's
yeah,
just like in my mind, when you hire Mike Mayhew for a book, like you know what you're getting. He's
right.
he is not changed. He
No,
is what he is.
yeah. So some very poor choices, I think, there, and the fact that it is a week coming out bi-weekly, right? And this thing is like happening so fast. You can also see shortcuts as we go along, right? So there are tons of scenes where Mojo is appearing on a monitor. And folks, it doesn't matter who the artist is, they're copying and pasting either one artist or another artist's Mojo face, and it's on every TV, and it's happening on multiple pages in every issue. So, like, by the end, you've seen this one image of Mojo, like, you must have seen it like 25, 30 times. It's just, you can see the shortcuts that are being taken as this is being created to tell a story that didn't need to be more than 3 issues at the most.
Yeah. It sucks.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I don't know,
it's
Adam, why
unfortunate.
you made us read this. I can't believe you would do this to us after
Listen,
all I did for you last week.
Oh, right. It had been a while since I had checked this out. And, one of the things that I like to do on this show is sort of go back and reconsider things. But this does not work, and it's a real shame because I do think that you can see the strength of what Bun is doing occasionally. There are moments where, like, Polaris, Magneto, and Danger are kind of fun to hang out with. And there are mostly other scenes where we're just trotting around with these characters that have no real interest in being together. There's no real rhyme or reason against what they're fighting against. So at the end of the day, it doesn't seem to make a difference what happens at the end of any issue. So I don't care.
I literally, as I was reading it, I could not care less about what was going on in X-Men Gold. And then somehow Negative Zone War won me back. And I do kind of want to go back and reread Negative Zone War again to think, hey, was like something there? Because I found out Negative Zone War is like what Guggenheim pitched. So maybe it was like he only had one story and it was that, and he was really excited for that, and everything else was filler.
Well,
which I could almost believe.
Something else that Guggenheim is always excited about, and look who's in this story, Ink showing up.
Ink. We did this last time. That Ink appeared, where we counted how many Ink stories Mark Guggenheim didn't write.
It's pretty amazing. His commitment to this very stupid character really does suck. So this is worse than the Claremont by far, I think.
Is this... I agree. Is this worse than X-Men Gold 1-3 Back to Basics? And let's be clear, we're counting the Back to Basics as the edited version without the weird political subliminal messaging. Just the content as it is.
Yeah, I think there is just a smidge of like Cullen Bunn's wit to raise it above that. I don't know if we're that bad, but
we worse than Axis.
Yeah, like we're in that realm. Like 800 right now is Axis, the way we've ranked it, and I'm just looking around. I think we're on par with something like Typhoid Fever at 791. Something that just feels very editorial in terms of just making writers do something that is a pitch that no one's interested in, and yet it still has to take up all this space. So I think we're in that.
I would put it below Typhoid Fever. Mm-hmm. I would put it below that. I would definitely put it below 792 Uncanny X-Men Sacred Vows. That's Polaris's wedding.
Oh, yeah.
And that story's not good, but I will say this for Chuck Austin. He put 100% into everything that he did. Chuck Austin never has half-assed his stuff.
I think this is a touch.
I don't like what he put in. I want to be clear. I wish he would have, but he never did.
No, this is a touch better than 795 Mark Guggenheim's Young X-Men 1-5. I think this is better than that.
Okay, but is this better than Jean Grey learning kung fu psychically to fight ninjas?
No. So this can be our new 795.
Yeah, right below Uncanny X-Men First Class Volume 1, Number 4, Jean and the Daughters of the Dragon is Mojo Worldwide. Wide.
Why?
Again,
Why,
I was
Adam?
trying to do a Step Brothers thing there, and then it turned into a Max Headroom thing. Again, I've never even watched Max Headroom. I'm going to be honest, Adam. I know Max Headroom more from Spaceballs than anything else.
Listen, it was a peculiar 80s like thing. You don't really have to know about it. And we've got one last Mojo story. And this is coming to us from Kelly Thompson and Jan Baldua. And this is Mr. and Mrs. X. What are the issues on this? This is 9 to
7 through 10. It's
7
called
through 10.
Honeymoon Lighting.
All right.
Or Gambit of Rogue Forever, excuse me. This is a weird book, right?
I remember when Mr. and Mrs. X came out that I was really interested in its first arc, which involved Xandra, right? And we learned that Professor X and Lilandra had a child. Then there was a really good issue right after that where they were all just hanging out at Gambit's apartment for like majority
Well, it
of
was
the
their
issue.
apartment with the cats. Yeah. I
Right.
know what you're talking about.
That's a fun one. And then this is where the book kind of slides a little bit, right? Because we get this multi-issue. No?
You say it slides. You have stronger feelings about the quality of the first 5 issues of this book than I do. And go back to our other Mr. and Mrs. X episode for that.
Yeah. I mean, the difference in quality between the Rogue and Gambit miniseries that came before it and Mr. and Mrs. X is a pretty sizable gap, right?
Yeah.
All I'm saying is I think I was at least a little more interested in what was going on with the book. What unfortunately happens when Kelly brings in this Mojoverse stuff is that she falls into, I think, the Mojo trap. And that is that Mojo should be more, because Mojo Worldwide does this same thing, should be more than Mojo just spinning a wheel and throwing characters into either an old story or, in this case, a different genre of story. And unfortunately, Kelly does this for like 2 out of the 4 issues, instead of getting to what I think is actually a kind of interesting plot point towards the end of this story, which is what Kelly always seems most interested in is exploring Rogue as a character. And in this particular case, she's exploring a canonical part of Rogue's trauma that I think is kind of interesting to call back, especially for this story. But I don't know that all of this like works. I don't think it ties together in a neat bow.
That's the thing. It super doesn't. Kelly does some stuff with like Spiral in this as well, where Spiral gets part of her soul back, but her soul looks to Gambit like a baby that becomes a cliffhanger. And I'll tell you what, bud, if I had a nickel for every time Kelly Thompson introduces a baby in her 12-issue Mr. and Mrs. X series, I would have 3 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happens 3 times. It's Xandra, it's this baby Spiral that's actually part of Spiral's soul. And she says, hey, it's interesting that you're seeing that as a baby, Gambit. And then it's freaking Kandra in the last arc of this that people forget she's not a baby. She is a toddler, though.
Right.
That she gets resurrected. It's weird. I think it's interesting that she wants to go to some of like the assault that Rogue deals with in the initial Genosha arc, but also I feel like that is subtextual, and like you have to infer that in the initial Genosha arc, and then you have to not directly and explicitly reference it in this arc, which feels like is not doing the service that those kind of stories really deserve. I feel like it tries and is not able to give it the space or the time that it really needs, so it ends a little flat. And I feel like that's common along this arc, because I feel like every character's emotional arc feels just a little flat and underdone.
It's an interesting choice, right? To make this callback to that first Genosha arc, and to, like you're saying, it's not making explicit what happened in that scene, but it's also suggesting that Rogue was traumatized enough by it that she's still hanging on to that, and that it's affecting how she is in the present.
Which,
I think that
to be fair, that's textual in what Claremont's doing, because that's when Carol Danvers takes over for the rest of the arc.
Yes. And I think that could be a really interesting callback. The fact that it's happening here at the end of this goofy story, where we're spending a lot of time, it's them as a noir, it's them as a Western, it's them as this, and it just, that, those two things don't add up, when you're trying to talk about something a little bit more seriously and you're putting it at the tail end of something that is not serious and is quite goofy. It doesn't work. I think the other thing that really doesn't work here for me is if Spiral is going to get back pieces of her soul, to what end? Like, we don't really quite understand what the goal of that is. Is the goal to get back to being Rita? Is the goal to escape Mojo's control? And how many pieces are there? Like, do we have an idea of what our end goal there is? And I don't know the answers to those questions, because all I know is that she needed a good thief to steal this thing. And it doesn't, that I need more. It's a good start, but I need more.
It's part of a larger trend that I see in a lot of comics, and I see in Thompson's Mr. and Mrs. X that feels very fan servicey, that feels very, I want to tie all of this up. I want to turn this character that I think is cool and really just make her a good guy now. And we got to stop. We're running out of bad guys in X-Men.
Yeah.
Guys, I mean, we've taken all the good ones already and made them into heroes. Like we were talking about that Magneto thing earlier. Magneto's a great villain. We already made him into a good guy. So we can't like convincingly use him as a bad guy anymore. Don't do that to Spiral, a character who mostly exists to have 6 arms and be kind of cool. I get it. I've read the stories. I've read them, but can we just let Spiral dance? Can we just let her like do her thing? I don't get it, man. I don't know.
I agree. I think that there's definitely,
and maybe I'm reading into it a little bit because this is, by Kelly Thompson's admission, her OTP getting married and then having sexy adventures together and then constantly talking about, hint, hint, we're going to have a baby, which I have 3 kids. I don't need everybody having babies. We have enough superhero babies.
Yes.
You guys keep doing bad stories and getting rid of the babies. Until you can be trusted with a baby, you guys can have no more babies. Use the babies you already have.
And I think
stop turning them into dragons. Stop sending them into the future. Utilize your existing floor babies, because Krakoa is not dealing with those floor babies very well, given everything that's going on.
We're not talking about existing that ever babies again. Come on.
Oh, bud, I'm never going to not talk about the floor babies.
No. I mean, the comics are never going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Come on. That's going to be a complete forgotten. Like, please.
I will never, Adam, I swear to you on this very podcast, I will never forget the floor babies of Fun Island.
Nor should we. It was a terrible, terrible thing that happened in a comic. I mean, come on. What the hell was that all about? But I totally agree with you.
That too much sex. They had babies and they just left them on the floor.
It's one of the most ridiculous and offensive things I think has ever been in Marvel comic.
It's just comics creators. Use the babies you already have before introducing new babies, please.
Yes. And I'm glad that Teeny kind of nipped this this arc in the bud when she got a hold of the characters in a very smart, intelligent, and adult way.
And tasteful. Like that was a way that leaves it open for the future, but saying, hey, look, right now, I don't want to have kids. And y'all, that's a very good and valid choice.
Exactly. It was a very mature way to handle that buildup. And I want more here. I don't.
How do we feel about Jan Bazadula's art in this? Because I like Jan's work in general. Like, she's a good hand for Marvel.
That's what I wanted to talk about next. Jan's one of the current, like, I really dislike the idea that they use the name Stormbreakers for their like, rising stars. But Jan
I think of it exclusively in Beta Ray Bill terms, and that helps me sleep at night.
There we go. I like that.
Because that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing, Adam. They're so comics brained that they cannot think of the cultural context in which Stormbreakers or any overt Norse stuff could be taken right now.
Yeah. So that aside, I think Basaldo's art is fantastic. I think there are times when it is a little too pretty and it lacks at least in this arc, because I've seen it on and off depending on which issue we're talking about. It sometimes lacks location. Like sometimes it's difficult to necessarily tell where our characters are, but I'm also very understanding about that, because this is one of those stories where are we? You know what I mean? Like, so much of where the characters are is specific to the Mojo verse, and it's all fantasies. So things could change like from panel to panel. So little understanding about that, but I mean, overall, very talented artist.
Yeah, pretty solid. So I think this arc is mixed. Where do we have that first Mr. and Mrs. X arc? It's at 253. This is way worse than that.
Oh yeah. I think of our three stories though, this is probably my favorite, just because I think it's
But this
is trying something, like
I agree.
Yeah.
But like Long Shot is at 344, and this is worse than that.
Oh yeah. No, I still don't think this should rank that high, because I don't know how much it's really accomplishing what it's setting out to do. I think it's a good looking book.
Is this better or worse than X Babies at 453?
Oh, gosh, I think this is probably worse than that. I mean,
And this doesn't have Baby Maggot in it.
No, and it's just light on content. You know what I mean? Like, I'm looking down the list. I mean, I'm wondering if this goes. I think this is probably a 500s book, but it could probably. I don't know if this is worse.
This is
better. Is this worse than the Muir Island Saga at 588?
No, it's not worse than the Muir Island Saga. What are you talking about, Adam?
All right.
This is not worse than Deadly Genesis at 524.
Okay. All right.
So I would say that this is actually better than the Magma and Mephisto date in New Mutants at 509, but I could be persuaded otherwise.
Okay. No, I like that.
I think we are right around 500. We're in the right spot. You and me are like picking through right here. I can see it on the Excel sheet. We're clicking around and thinking, what about this one? What about this
better
one?
or worse than Death of X? I think Death of X is probably a little better than this.
I would say Death of X at 501 is better. The Magus arc of New Mutants at 47 to 50 is probably better, but I think this is better than Generation Hex at 305 or 503.
Okay. All right. So this is going to be our new 503, Mr. and Mrs. X 7 to 10. I don't like to apologize for our picks. I don't. So I'm not going to. I think
I'm not, because I've seen what our listeners on Patreon have picked for upcoming shows, and they are worse. Worse is the wrong word.
We have some real fun stuff coming up. Really fun stuff.
Yeah. I want to give a shout out to our most recent pickers on Patreon who have picked out stories, because y'all are enabling us.
Yes. That's what we need.
Every one of like the last 5 requests, I have responded with a "oh hell yeah" or "sickos:" yes.
Yeah.
It's
so
chock-a-block with wild picks. And
yes,
folks, $5, keep them coming. Folks, seriously though, patrons, keep up the good work. And if you think that you can outflex our Patreon subscribers over the next few weeks of stupid, insane stories that they want us to rank that count as X-Men stories explicitly, but enable us to do dumb stuff after that, go on over to patreon.com/Battle of the Atom, and you can throw a couple of dollars our way, and then we'll do it.
That's right. That's right.
I have been frequently texting Adam about how wild the list is about to get, and I'm so happy.
And every time I look, it just puts a big smile on my face. So, Zach, anything going on in your world that you want to tell the world about?
That's a great question, Adam. No.
I love it. Folks,
what about you?
Follow. Yeah, you can always follow me on socials. Adam Rec on Insta and Blue Sky. Arthur Stacy on Twitter. And Zach, what craziness are we getting up to next week?
You know what, Adam? Next week we are talking about Count Nefaria.
Whoa! Oh, this
It's
is a
Count
story
Nefaria episode.
I think we've been talking about for a very long time, and I can't believe it's actually happening.
But it's happening, and it's amazing. But until then, folks, this has been Battle of the Iron. We hope you survived the experience.
Get it!